Good afternoon. My name is Trinity. Today we've presented to the jury a case of arson, which is a crime that has been used throughout history as a tool of destruction, which has caused harm to individuals, societies, and communities. I'll be presenting the closing arguments of this case so that the devastating nature and propensity of the case of arson, the crime of arson, can be well understood. Common law defines arson as any willful or malicious burning, attempt to burn with or without intent to defraud a dwelling house, public building, motor vehicle, aircraft, personal property of another, and so forward. Today, statutes no longer limit arson to a dwelling. Many states do punish damage to real property and to personal property. Important elements that are used to define arson, both today and historically, were first the intentional or reckless starting of a fire, where the method used to start a fire is completely irrelevant. Next, at common law, arson was to be committed against a dwelling. This is related to criminal laws against arson, which are designed to protect individuals and their rights to peace and security in their homes. Early American laws were influenced by English common law, which treated arson as a serious offense and was punishable by death in the 18th and 19th century. During those times, arson was a crime that was punishable by death, and because it was a common tool used in political and social conflicts that caused really great or very grave dangers to communities and societies. For example, during the American Revolution, both Americans and British forces did engage in arson to destroy military targets and intimidate civilians. The burning of an occupied house was one of the circumstances in which people were most likely to be killed. So early arson laws do specify and specifically address these circumstances. They were not intended to protect, laws were not intended to protect economic property interests and consisted of 4 elements, which included first, that the fire did have to be near a dwelling, not a commercial structure. The dwelling next did have to be in possession of another, and no one can be or could be convicted of burning their own home. Finally, the physical structure itself did have to be burnt, not its contents to be considered arson. And the fire did have to be conducted with a malicious intent. Moving forward, by the late 19th and 20th centuries, laws regarding arson did change, and most states had already adopted the view that arson was merely a crime against property and not an offense that threatened people with the risk of death or injury from a fire. In the 1970s, dramatic increases in arson had sparked the nation, especially in declining urban areas where in the 1980s, the ATF identified arson as one of the fastest growing crimes in the nation. By 1982, the Anti-Arson Act amended the explosive laws, specifically criminalizing the use of fire to commit any federal felony. The act did make it unlawful to damage, destroy by fire any property used in activities affecting interstate commerce. And this was also related to wars and whatnot. Today, arson does remain a serious crime for various reasons. First, so to speak, it is a crime that threatens public safety and that can have a serious impact on communities, cause fear and disruption, risk of injury and death to individuals in or near the affected areas. In addition, arson typically involves intentional destruction of property by fire, which can result in significant financial losses for property owners and insurers. The mens rea of common law is malice, which does not require dislike or hatred, but instead it does entail either a purpose to burn or a knowledge that the structure would burn, or the creation of an obvious hazard that without justification or excuse damages a dwelling. An example of an obvious fire hazard would be improperly storing flammable materials like propane or other flammable materials in an unsafe manner that could easily ignite and cause a fire, which could be considered arson, and other factors do go into that. Model Penal Code in Section 220.1 does define arson in terms of starting a fire or causing an explosion with the purpose of destroying a building or occupied structure of another. An individual is guilty of arson, a felony of the second degree, if he starts or causes an explosion with the purpose of first destroying a building or occupied structure of another, or destroying or damaging a property, whether his own or another's, to collect insurance for loss. It shall be an affirmative defense, and the actor's conduct did not recklessly endanger any buildings or occupied structures of any place, other person, danger of death or bodily injury. So there we see that it can be intentional or it can be accidental, and those are both punishable and considered arson. Punishments for arson under Arizona Statute 1703 is a Class 4 felony if the property had a value of more than $1,000. A Class 5 felony for arson is a property that has a value more than $100, but less than $1,000. Arson of a property is a Class 1 misdemeanor if the property had a value of $100 or less, and a Class 4 felony is punishable by up to 3.75 years of prison for the first offense. If the arson causes physical injury to another person, then it becomes a Class 2 felony, which is punishable up to 12 and a half years in prison. Class 1 felonies are punishable up to life in prison, and these penalties are subject to enhancement based on prior criminal history or other aggravating factors such as the severity of the offense and the circumstances surrounding the crime. Additionally, fines and prison time may be required by the state, and this does differ by jurisdiction and is subject to change, and it does change as we see throughout the history very often. The punishments for the punishments for arson must be severe enough to deter others from committing a heinous act. The law does recognize the gravity of arson and provides appropriate punishments, and those who commit arson must face consequences of their actions. So today I do urge the jury to consider the evidence carefully and return a rightful verdict for the case that was presented today, based on how severe arson is and how detrimental it can become. I do appreciate you listening today. Thank you.